Welcome, 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 everybody. Glad to see the people here in Macau. Glad to see the Macau ecosystem really developing and beyond. So before we begin, let's give the organizers of Beyond a round of applause. The work was hard. So today, we're going to be talking about the Southeast Asian VC landscape. My name is James Kwan. I'm the executive chairman at Jumpstart in Hong Kong. So Southeast Asia, the bright spot for VC investing amidst global uncertainties. That's what we're going to be discussing today. And as we all know, the VC startup investment space has been tough the last few years. Startups are looking for funding. VCs are getting pickier on how they allocate money. The words funding winter has been looming against all of us. However, Southeast Asia stood out better than a lot of geographies in the world. These guys are actually from Southeast Asia, so they probably didn't notice because it was a normal day for them. We talked to Angela about that, but the rest of the world noticed. Southeast Asia actually stood apart. Therefore, a lot of foreign investors actually started looking into Southeast Asia. So today, we have in our panel 3 esteemed VCs, probably the 3 most famous groups in Southeast Asia coming out today. Tsao. He's the co-founder of Gobi Partners, a leading Asian VC firm with $1.6 billion asset under management. They're based out of Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur. We have Roderick Purwana. He's a managing partner of East Ventures, a leading sector agnostic fund with over 300 tech investments. We have Angela Toy. Angela is the COO and partner at Golden Gate Ventures based out of Singapore. They have 90 investments in the tech space with $250 million asset under management. So today we're going to be exploring 3 themes: VC investment strategies and trends in Southeast Asia, resiliency in uncertain times, and opportunities and challenges in Southeast Asia. So I think a lot of the audience will be startup founders or people looking to get their first investment or work with VC. So we're going to start with an easy question, an icebreaking question. So this is going to go for everybody here. So we'll go from Thomas, Roderick, Angela. So what are the top 3 criteria you look for when you fund promising startups in Southeast Asia? Thomas?
Yeah, no, I think this is just a guideline, of course. For Gobi, if we were to boil it down after 22 years, I think for every VC, it's probably a variation of the same 3 kind of themes. The first one is, obviously the team. And when I say team, it depends on what stage your company's at, right? So the earlier you are, it really comes down to your personality and your character. And I think for Gobi, the key thing is, I think if I were to boil it down now, within team on personality, it's, can you deal with adversity? So we meet a lot of successful people. They went to the best schools on the planet, Goldman, McKinsey, and VCs, of course, love that. But what we've realized is, for a lot of entrepreneurs, they've just never really stumbled. Everything's been kind of. And so we actually like it. Look, how do you deal with adversity? It's hard to kind of measure that sometimes. So I think that's one. The second one is also coachability. And when I mean that, it's not like, just doing whatever a VC tells you, because that's always wrong. But knowing when to take advice and knowing when to push back. So we try to create a term. I think coachability, is that sort of the term, maybe?
That's the term I would use.
Yeah, so I think that's important. And then, of course, it's, what's your tech advantage? What's your competitive edge, right? So that's usually the technology. And then, obviously, you have to be in a growing market. And I remember one time an entrepreneur asked me, he's like, well, if I have the first 2, why is market important? Well, here's why market's important. Because you could be the biggest beeper company. Do any of you know what a beeper is? No, maybe, okay. So hey, you could be the best company and you have the best team and you got the best technology for beepers, but you know what? Nobody wants beepers anymore. So you got to be in the right market. So for us, those roughly kind of the 3.
Great. You gave me 4, but I'll count it as 3. Roderick.
Well, since Tom gave you 4, I'll give you 2 maybe, so just balance out. But
We'll keep you at 3.
No, I think like what Tom said, right? I think it's a variation of probably similar things, right? I think At East, we are a very founder-driven firm. So, ultimately, we look at the founders, management, if you will, right? And then, within that, specifically what traits, one of the things we do try to look at is character or integrity, I guess, right? Which is very important. And embedded in that, I guess, whether they hustle, perseverance, and whatnot, right? During good or bad times as well. But the other part is, of course, the capability itself, right? And then, inherently, whether they can do the things they say they can do. So those are the things, I guess, we look at. Yeah.
Angela.
Yeah, it's hard to chime in because they've pretty much said everything. I mean, I think Golden Gate kind of shares similar sort of ethos with Gobi and East, being very much founder first in our approach. But I have to say, I think one thing that sticks out is really market size for us when it comes to evaluating startups, because at the end of the day, we're unlike like the US or China with kind of this large homogeneous markets. So apart from, of course, evaluating the founding teams, kind of determining like whether the market size is large enough is really important for us.
Great. I mean, there's some reoccurring themes. All you guys look for integrity in the founder. So that's quite important. So that's something to look for, guys. If you're looking for VC investment, these are the main traits that these guys are going to aim for. So we're going to move into our themes now. So VC investment strategies and trends in Southeast Asia. So Thomas, this is you. Gobi's been around for over 20 years. You guys have been started in 2002, and he told me to say he's only 32 right now. Is that
I
what
started the company when I was
yeah.
10.
So we talked about this beforehand. And the landscape has changed. The landscape continuously changed, and it changed a lot more in the last few years. So how does Gobi keep up with it, and how do you capitalize on the opportunities, let's say within the last 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think at Gobi, we look at a couple of things. So there's long-term and short-term. I mean, long-term, the famous saying, demographics is destiny, right? And so I think when we first started investing in China in 2002, and China was an emerging market, right? It enjoyed this massive, population, growing, increasing fertility rates. They were going to have this massive labor kind of dividend. It was at a very early stage of the technology adoption. And at the time, the Western capital markets, the Western media, the narrative was all about, oh, China, look at Chinese people, they're just like us. I mean, every day there'd be an article, right? Oh, they just opened up their first Starbucks. Oh, look, they're just like us. Oh, they just opened up the first Nike store. And then at some point, maybe I think after the 2008 Olympics, that narrative started to change, right? It's, oh, they're starting to be like us, and they're starting to be better than us in some things, right? And you started to see that change, and the reason why I point that out is you see this sort of similar narrative now in India, right? Where it's like, oh, India, it's great. So I think what I'm trying to say is you want to stay away from sometimes the narratives, and you want to look at the underlying kind of the deeper undercurrents. And when we looked at China back then, it was like, wow, the demographics are just good. They're young. Now, when you look at China, it's kind of, that's changed. Obviously, 20 years have passed. I think China has done some remarkable things. Look, the people will always complain. But if you think about it, if you ask the average Chinese person, are you better off today than you were 20 years ago? What do you think the answer would be?
It's actually changing right now, right?
Right.
So
most people would say it's a lot better. And I don't understand sometimes that media narrative. I mean, I think there may be some really hardliners, maybe in D.C., I don't know. But, why would anybody be rooting for the collapse of China? I mean, think about that. If China collapsed tomorrow, does that actually do anybody any good? I mean, you'd have like 1 billion Chinese people swimming across the Pacific into California. Right? So sometimes I ask my friends in D.C., I'm like, what are you trying to, we are where we are. So the longer term trends is one, and then I think you're talking about the short, which is what's going on now with the geopolitical situation. And since this is a more intimate audience, and I know Emi wants some real thoughts, is look, people have always asked me, so what's going to lead to the end of the U.S.-China kind of tension? And I thought about this, and I said, what's going to end it? It's when India becomes so powerful that the U.S. attention then shifts over to India. And you could see the same thing, right? Right now, India, the U.S., great friends. And I talk to my Indian friends, too, Indian friends. They're like, oh, this, China. I'm like, hey, don't get too happy, because the same type of pressure that the Western governments are good at, when India gets viewed as a threat, it'll get shifted over to India. And I see people laughing. And look, and the narrative is the same. Right now, they're the world's biggest democracy. But if they wanted to change the narrative, it'd be like, oh, India has all these human rights abuses against women, right? You could argue that. I'm not saying I say that, but I'm just saying the narratives are always changing when it suits people's maybe agendas. So at Gobi, what I'm trying to say is we try to stay away from that. We look at the deeper underlying fundamental trends, and we're long-term investors. So a lot of the kind of headline, I call it white noise, we try to stay away from that and focus on kind of those deeper trends.
Right, yeah, I mean, when you're king of the hill, you never let the other guy become king of the hill, right? So, Roderick, East Ventures is sector agnostic. You've invested in different verticals. What do you see the next emerging technologies, and what do you prioritize in your investment models in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, it's definitely shifted over time. I think we've been around for roughly 15 years. Our first ever investment was a company called Tokopedia, which is an e-commerce company. Since then, I think it has shifted quite a bit. So e-commerce, then fintech, maybe logistic tech, and then B2B to a certain extent, SME enablement. We've done ed tech, health tech. A few of the areas we're looking at right now is around healthcare, climate tech, but I think going forward, of course, AI is something that's big in everybody's mind. How to really play that, especially for the Southeast Asia and Indonesia market, is something that we're still also kind of looking into. But I think there are still different areas, sectors that's probably ripe for disruption, I guess. So so we're quite excited about quite a few areas now.
Great, thank you. Angela, so Southeast Asia is big. It has so many different countries, and what's your approach in diversifying your portfolio? Do you diversify it geographically, or you just look at the sector, the verticals, and it doesn't matter what geography they come from? Do you also examine investments outside the Southeast Asian region?
Yeah. I mean, so kind of adding to kind of the point earlier on market size, right? We don't really have like a threshold where we're like, oh, we need to invest a certain amount in each country. I don't think we can succeed as a fund like that. But it's really more, what are the kind of emerging themes, and is the market size large enough to, serve kind of the needs and for a company to really grow. So I'd say, for us, the three main markets would be Singapore, Indo, and Vietnam. Now, Vietnam is, really interesting for us, and I think for a lot of other investors as well in the region. The people have very similar traits when it comes to, Chinese kind of culture. Very adaptable, they very hardworking, and they just find different ways to make things work. So we really like it about them. And kind of, I think recently we've actually managed to launch a fund in the Middle East. So we are looking outside of Southeast Asia as well, with the Middle East being an emerging ecosystem for startups and VC. And because for us, really the mission at the end of the day is to empower the audacious and help emerging ecosystems, the startup founders in emerging ecosystems. So we are not saying that we'll always be in Southeast Asia, but it's more, okay, who else can we help with, right? And the ecosystem building that we did, in Singapore 10 years ago, and then Vietnam 3 years ago, I think we're going to do that for the Middle East, and hopefully other countries as well.
Great, Thomas. You are going Gobi is not just, your headquarters in Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur. Outside, I just met the head of Pakistan from you. Maybe talk about how you extended outside of Southeast Asia, where you're reaching, and what's the goals.
Yeah, no, I think I was on a panel earlier with Roderick, so I'll continue the thought. I mean, I mean, when Gobi, we came out to Southeast Asia kind of in 2010. We first landed in Singapore, and then I moved out to Kuala Lumpur in 2015. So I've been there 9 years now. And we named that strategy kind of connecting Northeast Asia with Southeast Asia. We call that Crouching Panda, Hidden Top Here. So I'm going to continue that. So the next 10 years we see, so maybe the last decade, Gobi was looking at kind of Northeast Asia to Southeast Asia. The next 10 years we're looking at now connecting kind of East Asia to West Asia. And again, I really congratulate Angela on what they've done. It's fantastic. I think, and that's one example, I think there will be more, of connecting kind of that East Asia to West Asia. And West Asia is the Middle East, right? So we now have a new saying, it's a Crouching Panda, Hidden Top Here, and now Oryx, right? So you got another animal. No? Not working? Okay, that's all right. It's after lunch anyway. So, but you know, what we're seeing is, we believe a couple things. One is that the world is not necessarily deglobalizing, although I think there are, maybe extreme forces on both sides that would like to see that happen. We think the world is reglobalizing, and we think that Asia will become the center point, right? You really can feel, right, the nexus of the world, I think, is kind of shifting towards Asia. I think that benefits all of us in this room. And then the second part of it is, I think venture capital is really becoming a pillar, right, of economic policy in every country. At Gobi, we've always believed in a distributed innovation model. If you think about it, when I first started in the business, I mean, the mantra was that the world's greatest entrepreneurs could only be found in Silicon Valley, right? Right? And again, I remember I met Don Valentine of Sequoia. And he said something to me the first time I met him in China, and he was like, hey, you know, we love China, but we'll never invest here because we won't invest outside of a 25-mile radius of Silicon Valley. They had a term for that. It was called zip code investing. They wouldn't invest outside of the zip code because it was like, look, if you were a good entrepreneur or you'd be in Silicon Valley or you wouldn't, you know. And just think about how much the world has changed. We're now seeing ecosystems, right, develop to people like Angela and Roderick in all parts of the world. I think that's exciting because we need multiple centers of innovation to deal with the world's challenges. The geopolitical tension aside, I think Roderick had a great point, which is when you look at climate change, or somebody yesterday said, it's not global warming, it's global boiling. I mean, when are we going to actually do something about it? It's going to take collective action because, you know, there's no borders on those types of problems. And so for us, if we can play a small role in taking what we've learned, you know, it started off kind of in China, Southeast Asia, bring that to other kind of emerging markets like Pakistan. I think that would be, you know, if we can do that, that'd be making a little bit of a difference and a little bit of impact for all of us.
Totally agree. We're moving into our second theme, resiliency in uncertain times. So Roderick, compared to other regions in the world, Southeast Asian economies have weathered the storm a bit better. What are the key factors you think contributed to Southeast Asia's economic resiliency?
Yeah, I think we've been extremely lucky in Southeast Asia, right? I think despite the global uncertainties, right? I think it definitely impacts us as well, right? But we've weathered it relatively slightly better, I guess, than some of the other markets, right? So what factors contribute to that? A couple things maybe. One, I think politically, the region is quite stable, and I think that has helped as well, right? I think you need a relatively stable political condition, right? I think geopoliticals, aside, having a stable political condition helps for sure. And as part of that, I think Southeast Asia has remained neutral to this sort of West versus East kind of, tension that's sort of going on the past few years, right? And actively being neutral, I guess, right? So I'm also active in ASEAN Business Advisory Council, right? And I think, as a policy, we're working out and figuring out how to work together, right? As a region as well. and working with both, so both the western side and the eastern side, I guess, right? So that has, to a certain extent, I think, help, help the region sort of weather kind of this global tension and global condition right now.
Great. Angela, we're going to continue on Roderick's thought right there. So what role has resiliency played in your investing thesis and your strategies? Expand on, does resiliency play the role?
Yeah, of course. I think, especially when it comes to, as mentioned by Roderick, like Southeast Asia, I think has benefited, pretty much, I would say. I mean, at the end of the day, if this plays, for another few more years, nobody's going to benefit from it. But at this moment, I think Southeast Asia is still benefiting from sort of the tensions. The US is kind of looking to other areas to deploy apart from China. So yeah, for us, it's more like, and it's already happened. We see, a lot of the larger tech firms looking towards like Indonesia or Vietnam when it comes to, setting up manufacturing hubs. So those are the kind of areas where we look at, and it is resilient. I think it's now just a matter of training up, labor, having the talent to be able to support that growth.
And Thomas, do you have any examples in your portfolio where those specific teams weathered the resiliency, they weathered the storm through the last few years of COVID?
Oh, many examples. I mean, we had a company during COVID. I'll give maybe two examples. One of them's a company that was in the Umrah travel space. It's called Umrah Me. It's serving the larger, Muslim pilgrims who perform Umrah. So there's obviously Hajj and then Umrah. They focus on Umrah, and if you guys remember, I mean, they were doing great. We just brought on, and here's a blast from the past, Credit Suisse as the financial advisor with a great valuation, about to close, and then COVID happens. Well, just reliving these days is like, wow, there's a nerve. And you just, I mean, for many of you in the room probably remember, I mean, just, I've never seen it where revenues were growing, and then it literally, I mean, it wasn't like, it was just like, wow, it was like they're really falling off a cliff because travel got restricted. So that's one. Then they've recovered. They had to make very, very tough cuts. The travel space got really hit. That was one example. Another one's a company called Sandbox VR. They're based out in Hong Kong. They've expanded now to Southeast Asia, the Middle East. They're huge in the United States. But again, that's a virtual reality game. They've signed all these IP deals with Netflix. So they have a virtual reality game around the Squid Game. If you're in Hong Kong, any of you tried Sandbox VR? You raise your hand. Okay. So, so great. I'm glad you did. But
A lot of Hong Kong people.
yeah, but during COVID, you were not there, unfortunately. So again, and that's one where I remember even sending, because Stephen, texted us like, hey, we got all these like venture debt coming due. Nobody can go to our stores because of COVID. What the heck am I gonna do? And as a VC, we're just like, oh, we better give some inspirational. So I just wrote back, what doesn't kill you will only make you. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that was very true because, they came out of it when COVID was over. I mean, they've just gone gangbusters. But that's two clear examples of how COVID really can mess with a startup's business. And again, we were very fortunate. Money is money, as they always say, but those are instances under extreme stress when you know which investors are backing you. And again, I think we were very fortunate. The other investors in those two companies, really, we all pulled together. In some cases, I had to cut funding to other companies just to fund them, but they came out of it okay. So,
Great. Well, moving to our last theme, the opportunities and challenges in the next 5 years in Southeast Asia. So, Angela, there's unique risk factors. I think we touched upon some political risk factors a little earlier. What do you do to mitigate those risks? Political, economic, anything that you do when you go through due diligence?
I think it really depends on, the country. I mean, obviously we're investing more in markets that we're a bit more familiar with, having been there 12 years. But it depends on really the stability of the political landscape there. Regulations, I think, especially if you're investing in fintech, I think, that's an area where I think there have been some instances in the past where, Southeast Asia has, there's been some risks there, right? So really understanding those risks. But I'd say that in recent years, it's really stabilized a lot. I think kudos to kind of the governments for, reacting fast and I think learning from more mature markets as well have really helped. And internally for us, we study a lot of what has worked or has not worked in other markets. And, if people have, succeeded and failed, why not learn from them, right? And see how it actually applies to our portfolio or, the deals that we're looking at.
So Roderick, in your view, how does regulatory environments and policy frameworks in different Southeast Asian markets impact startup success? And how much does that play into your investment considerations?
Yeah, I can't comment on the other markets that we don't really play in, right? But the ones we are familiar with, I think definitely it plays a factor. For countries like Singapore, where the government is super supportive, I guess, to a certain extent, right? And I think that helps, right? Malaysia, as I understand, also is relatively supportive, right? I think there's quite a few government agencies and whatnot that does that. Indonesia is a little unique. I think in general, we don't have protectionism, I guess, in the country, but also they're quite supportive, but they're also not as supportive in terms of creating vehicles or whatnot to just prop up the investments, right? So, but in general, we don't take we let the companies figure it out themselves, I guess, to a certain extent, right? I think Indonesia is one of those countries where it's chaotic, but it works, I guess, because it's chaotic, and to a certain extent because the startup have to fight, or the founders have to fight things for themselves and figure things out, right? They become quite resilient. So definitely regulatory plays a part. And then depending also on what type of startup, right? I mean, if you're in fintech, of course, you have to follow the rules and whatnot, right? I mean, there are other areas where you're in maybe consumer space that is less regulated, I guess, right? So you do have to take that into factor, and that's also why it's unique for a lot of the startups or companies that end up having multiple markets, right? Because they'll have to act and react to different type of regulatory environment, right? So a lot of people put Southeast Asia as one big area, but it's really not, right? So yeah, something to consider, of course, when you look at regulatory.
Great. I want to be conscious of the time, so we're going to do a closing question. This is going to go to all you guys. The competitive landscape in the VC investment space in Southeast Asia is going to change in the future. So we talked about the past. Now let's fast forward 3 to 5 years. How do you guys stay ahead of the curve? And how are you going to position yourself potentially within Southeast Asia and outside Southeast Asia? Thomas, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think, Southeast Asia, what you're going to see is, first of all, you're going to see, tiering, which happens in every market, and that's going to depend on ultimately, what your returns are, right? So I think you're going to see that. I think right now you also see kind of sector specialization, and you'll see a kind of a deepening of the ecosystem. There'll be more products. You'll have much more, I'm sure, like in the venture debt space. There are going to be big opportunities there. And so just a deepening, I think, of the overall ecosystem, and there'll be much more players. I think you'll see a lot more international participation as well. And I think you're going to see a lot more participation also from China, which I still think is still early stages. We haven't seen it. I'm actually a little surprised. I thought it'd be more more robust than it has been, maybe because we're still getting over COVID and the traveling bans. But yeah, that's what I would see. Yeah.
Roderick?
Yeah, I think you have to understand what sets you apart, right? What makes you unique as a firm, I guess, right? You have to focus on the things you do best, I guess, right? And beyond that, I think it's a very dynamic industry, I guess, right? So you gotta keep up to date, and then you gotta make sure you stay relevant, I guess, right? I mean, yeah.
We know about Golden Gate, we know about Gobi. Do you have visions to go outside of Southeast Asia in the near future?
We started off we started off both in Japan and Southeast Asia. It's run separately. We share the same name, right? So we've always had history with Japan. We announced late last year that we're doing a partnership in Korea, and keeping in with the theme of making sure you know what you do best. We end up partnering with someone in Korea rather than venturing that ourselves, right? I think that's something that that's an attempt from our end, right, to understand whether we can try to go beyond Southeast Asia or leverage things in Southeast Asia and outside of Southeast Asia. But we're just starting, I guess. So maybe check back with me in a little bit, and I'll let you know how that goes.
Great, Angela.
Yeah, I think two things come to mind. I think first of all is returns, which is DPI, right? That's all our LPs ask for these days. But I think it has taught us, that's our learning. It's like you're an investor and you're a money manager, and so you have to be aware of when you should be taking some returns off the table. And I think specifically for Southeast Asia, more important, to have a strategy for that versus, kind of the typical, what you see in the US in terms of like, at year 8, you're going to get some sort of IPO happening. And then the other theme is, I think just to emphasize that kind of, working with a few countries or building a larger global or regional platform for our companies, where, I think the strength lies in uniting rather than, being fragmented, right? Like, if we can all work together and then we can, introduce companies and, to each other, and, ultimately consolidation will happen, but it, makes companies go bigger and there's a bigger IPO that happens. I think it's all helpful in that sense. So kind of building that global platform.
Thank you. I learned a lot. I hope you guys got something out of this. These guys are building the ecosystem, developing the ecosystem. Let's give these guys a round of applause for sharing. Thank you so much. We forgive you, Angela. It's okay.
Two mic drops, yeah.
2 mic drops, right? So thank you, guys. This concludes this session. I'm sure these guys are willing to take some questions outside. We're probably going to chase them out the door, but I'm sure that you could chase them down and probably ask them questions one-on-one. Thank you, guys.